Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, this week I know we are a day late, and for that you have my sincere apologies. But I went to do the podcast yesterday, and I was having a look around at various websites, including PokeBeach.com, the best site for Pokemon news. And I'm not actually paid to say that or anything like that. They just are, and I use their website a lot, so you know, credit where credit's due. And they said that it was likely that Emerald Break was going to be spoiled last night or today. And I didn't want to end up in a situation where I do a podcast yesterday and by the time after you go to listen to it, you're like, oh, Emerald Break's out. Oh, he hasn't dealt with it. So I made the decision to delay it just for a day, just for this week only, so that we could get all of Emerald Break onto this. And my friend should be arriving at my front door in about 90 minutes. So let's see what we can get through in that time. Make sure we can get through all the good Emerald Break stuff. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through all the regular Pokemon, by which I mean non-EXs, non-ancient trait. Then we're going to go through the ancient trait by category, because I was having a think about this and thinking about the best way to go through it. And I reckon that the best way to really do this is to actually have a look at each ancient trait and the Pokemon that have it, turn by turn. And then we're going to have a look at the EXs and finish off with the trainers. As always, any thing that you think I've missed, anything you disagree with, hit me up on Twitter @TheWassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. And there is every chance I'll come on next week and talk about things which I've missed that people have told me. Now, this is my first look at the set when the set comes out in the UK. And I know we haven't done that so much with Primal Clash, just due to timing issues and that week I missed and everything else going on. But when it comes out in the UK, I'll give you my with hindsight look. And if any interesting decks come up or anything comes up, I'll mention it on the podcast on a weekly basis. But this is the set came out today. I'm having a quick gander just to have a quick little look at, you know, what we think might be good. So, with that in mind, let's crack on to the non-ancient trait, non-EX Pokemon. And starting off, we've got Executor. Now, it's a Stage 1 grass Pokemon with 120 HP, and it has one attack which is useful. For a single grass energy, you do 20 damage times the number of colourless Pokemon your opponent has in play. Now, one thing we're going to be talking about a lot today is Rayquaza. Rayquaza is amazing, and he's got a huge amount of support, all of which we'll get to as we go through. I'm going to mention a few things, you know, early just because we have to, including a stadium, which allows you to put 8 Pokemon on your bench. Now, that basically means that you've got Rayquaza, and you've got Shaymin, which is a colourless Pokemon, and you're going to want to play Altaria, which gets rid of the weakness, and all of them allow Executor to do 20 damage for a single grass energy. It is incredibly useful, and if it came out, you know, right this second, nobody's really playing colourless Pokemon, so it would be one of those, you know, put it aside, maybe it'll be good in the future kind of Pokemon. As it happens at the moment, however, by the time this set comes out, Rayquaza should be everywhere, and this could be an interesting card. We also have a Beautifly, which has got an ability Miracle Scale, otherwise known as Safeguard. Prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon EX, which means it doesn't get rid of status conditions or anything like that. If an EX were to try and discard energy or confuse it, then that would go through, but it prevents damage. Although I should mention at this stage that remember we are working with Japanese translations, and although they are usually pretty good, and there are other websites that translate, but they've generally been wrong in the past where there's been a dispute between them and PokeBeach, hence my use of PokeBeach. But, you know, these could change, these translations could be wrong. The problem is, you know, that's awfully easy to play around with EXs, and you can still use laser and non-EXs. If you play against something like a Speed Lugia deck, which only has Pokemon EXs and doesn't play laser and all of that, then yes, this will be really, 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 really good. But it's such a niche card. It could be useful, but then you look at the attack cost, and it's a grass double colourless to do 80 damage, and you can make your opponent switch the active, and it would, of course, be their choice, not yours. So, you know, it's one of those things that looks kind of cool. It could be useful, but I really don't see it being hugely important in the near future. One card that is, however, very interesting is Ninjask, and it's got the ability Wing Buzz. Once during your turn, you may discard a card from your hand. Then discard the top card of your opponent's deck. And it's actually got an attack, Spectrum attack for a grass and a colourless, 30 damage. Search your deck for 2 Ninjask and put them onto your bench, shuffle your deck afterwards. So, it allows you to put them onto your bench. Now, the translation we've got is that it says Ninjask, not Nincada, which means you can put it onto your bench as a basic, as if it was, Archie or Max's cards from Primal Clash. Which means you could, as early as turn 2, have 3 of these, well, I suppose 4 of these bad boys on the bench, and be making your opponent discard turn after turn. Let's not forget that there's also the Bunnery, which has an ancient trait which allows you to attack twice, and has an attack for a colourless energy, making them discard a card. You could, in theory, be making your opponent discard, up to 6 cards from their deck every turn. Now, mill decks are not particularly brilliant in this format for 2 reasons. First of all, speed. Your Bunneries and your 40 HP Nincadas ain't going to be lasting terribly long. And, of course, we've got Lissandra's trump card. And, essentially, unless you manage to discard your opponent's trump card and all of their VS Seekers, they're just going to be able to play Lissandra's trump card and get right back in the game. But somebody is going to make this into a deck. Somebody is going to have a little bit of fun with this. And let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that there are decks like the Executor deck I mentioned last week, which allows you to, just sit there and stop your opponent playing supporter cards every turn while doing 30 damage, or even something like Seismitoad. If you can't play trainers and your opponent's discarding up to 6 cards a turn, it's a bit of 4 cards a turn because you'd just be using Ninjask, that could be pretty useful. And the translation we have at the moment is that it stacks. This is one of the, and there's a few Pokemon like this in the set, but this is a Pokemon that really, really intrigues me, in that the ability, this could just be chucked into any deck as, a 4/4 line or whatever. You could do less than that, just to see, right, I've got my deck, but I'm also just going to discard a bunch of cards. Imagine something like a Seismitoad deck, which has usually got a bit of space in, or a Virgin deck, which has usually got a bit of space in. This can be a nice little counter, because generally, if you can get rid of enough cards from your opponent, they're not going to do anything. If you're playing against a Seismitoad deck and you get rid of all 4 of their DCEs, they're going to be struggling. There's also a Shedinja, which I just want to mention because it's a 30 HP stage 1, which has 10 less HP than Nincada. And I know there is reasons for this from the video game, etc. It's got a fun little attack that does 50 damage times the number of damage counters on this Pokemon, which could be a maximum of 2. And it's, it's just not... I suppose you could maybe play Giant Cloak, but even so. Although it might only be expanded, that may have rotated out. I'll have to check that. It's not great, let's just put it that way, but it's a fun little card, and it's got such a low HP, I thought it was worth mentioning. Now, there is an ancient trait Burnett, which we're going to be talking about later on, but there is a better Burnett, which I want to be talking about, well, not a better Burnett, but a different Burnett, which I want to have a quick mention of before we go any further. And this Burnett has the ability Hidden Tools. As long as this Pokemon is in play, each Pokemon tool attached to both players' Pokemon has no effect. And the attack isn't very good, and it's only got 80 HP, and it's weak to Dark, which is, regular Evil Tau with a Muscle Band is going to KO it very easily. But even with all of that, it's got a cool little effect. Now, it doesn't get rid of the tool, so something like Tool Drop could put a 1/1 Burnett in, although why you would, I'm not entirely sure. But essentially, it stops tools working. If you KO a Pokemon with Life Dew, you do take the prize. If you get attacked by a Pokemon with Muscle Band, they don't do the extra damage, etc. You could just play something like a Startling Megaphone or something like a Chatot to get rid of the tools, but this isn't a trainer, so it can't be trainer locked. It isn't an attack, it's an ability which works from the bench. I don't think it's ever really going to see a huge amount of use, but it is kind of interesting. Now, another card, and this is one which wasn't on my initial list of interesting cards. No, sorry, it was, but it only is a kind of curiosity. And I got a tweet from someone asking saying that they were excited about this card. So I'm going to give a couple of minutes to Deoxys, but I don't think it's terribly good. It's got an attack called First Contact. You can use this attack on your first turn of the game, draw 2 cards. And there are 2 Pokemon in the set that allow you to attack on turn 1, even if it's the first turn of the game, which is kind of interesting. It's also got an interesting little attack called Overdrive Smash for a Psychic and a Colourless, but of course once you get a Dimension Valley down, this goes down to a Psychic. 30 damage during your next turn, this Pokemon's Overdrive Smash does 60 more damage. So it does 30, and then it does 90, 90, 90. It wouldn't reset as long as you used Overdrive Smash every turn and Deoxys stayed in the active. It would continue to do 90. If, for instance, your opponent Lysandre'd up a bench Pokemon and killed it and you put Deoxys back in the active, it's no longer counted as the same Pokemon. But as long as you kept attacking turn after turn, 90 damage for 1 Psychic Energy. And that's pretty good. It's only got 110 HP, it's weak to Psychic, it's not going to last very long. But as a kind of emergency attacker in a Psychic deck that's already playing Dimension Valley, it has some merit. Certainly more than I initially gave it when I had my look through. I don't think it's going to be great, I don't think it's going to be amazing, but I think it's interesting. Moving on, we also have an Absol that's another one of the ones, like Shedinja, which just has an amazing ability. The attack does 30 for a dark and a colourless, and this is fairly pants. But the ability, Cursed Eyes. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may move up to 3 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another of your opponent's Pokemon. It's like a very prescriptive Cursed Hand, the Dusknoir ability that people have been using for so long. It allows you to move 3 damage counters. But this can be the difference between a KO and not a KO. This could be the thing that takes your opponent's Pokemon that isn't dead and makes them dead. This is going to see play. I don't know if it's going to see a huge amount of play, and I don't think it's going to be amazing, but I do really think that it's going to be just utterly... It's going to be used. Someone's going to use it, and it's going to be used in a very, very good deck. I like Absol. Moving on, there is one metal Pokemon in the set. It's a Jirachi, and it's not terribly good. But it has an attack for a metal and a colourless, which says discard all energy attached to this Pokemon. At the end of your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon is knocked out. And we've seen attacks like this before. I believe there was a Gothitelle that did it, and certainly there was a Beedrill more recently that did it. The problem is everybody's playing Switch, or Escape Rope, or Floatstone, or can just discard energy to retreat, etc. And it's got 70 HP, so it's gone die very, very quickly. It takes 2 energy attachments. I suppose you could play it in a Bronzong deck to make it slightly easier to get the energy on him. But even so, it's just not... It's a brilliant idea. It's very, very rarely going to work. So, sorry Jirachi, I like it. Now, there's a Dragonite that I really, really like, and again, it's another one, and this has happened, and there's one more of these to come. Just an example of a Pokemon that's just got a really, really cool ability that you genuinely might want to play in your deck just for the ability. Now, it is a Stage 2, it's Dragonite, and that means that there are certain difficulties in trying to get it out and working, and that could be a problem. But the ability is called Max Wind, and it reads, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may remove all damage counters from one of your Pokemon. If anyone was playing when Blissey Prime was out, the Truth, second place at Worlds, blah blah blah, 2011 I think that was, you might remember this. You can it's like a max potion, but you don't have to discard the energy. You just heal the Pokemon. And of course you can use this with something like Super Scoop Up or Raz or Scoop Up Cyclone and reuse it again and again. It doesn't have the ability, the ancient trait which allows it to evolve up earlier, which is a little bit of a pain, but it's interesting enough to get a little bit of mention. Now another card, and I read through all of this a couple of times, but on my first run through I looked at Salamence, I was like meh. And on my second run through, I read Salamence. I love Salamence. Firstly, it's Salamence. Salamence is just inherently cool. Secondly, 160 HP on a Stage 2 is pretty good. Thirdly, it's got 3 attacks, and they're all pretty darn good. First attack, 1 fire energy, wreck. 60 damage, discard any stadium in play. You add a Muscle Band or a Bangle, that's 80 or 90. For 1 energy, that's pretty efficient. But it's on a Stage 2, so we need to do better, okay? Power Howl, water, double colourless, 20 damage times the number of cards in your opponent's hand. Now we're starting to do a little bit better. Let's say, for argument's sake, you build this up on the bench while you've got a Seismitoad in the active, so your opponent can't play trainers, and then you bring out Salamence to do one-hit KOs. That's pretty good. Or... for 2 fire or water and a colourless, 170 damage, discard 3 energy attached to this Pokemon. And this is a situation where I would usually say, yeah, but that's an awful lot of energy to put onto a Stage 2. But a card which I want to put it on record, I totally called this Double Dragon Energy, which I don't believe was leaked last week. Double Dragon Energy provides 2 energy of any type when attached to a dragon Pokemon. This can be 2 energy attachments. Now, you would have to discard both of them if you only had 2 Double Dragon Energy on there. But 170 damage. And it's weird because Pokemon love 150. So you can actually do 190 or 200 with a Muscle Band or a Silver Bangle. I like Salamence. Now, I don't know if it's going to be a deck by itself. But then again, you can put a Fire Energy on, you can say, for instance, put a Fire Energy on there turn 1 to do 60 damage, and then, or the first turn he's active, I should say, and then the second turn, you can put a Double Dragon Energy to do Power Howl, and then the third turn, you can do Steam Blast for 170, discarding the Double Dragon and one of the basics, and still have a Fire Energy on there to do Wreck or Power Howl the following turn. It's really, really interesting. I like Salamence. It's got the old problem now that it's a stage 2 and stage 2s are slow and blah blah blah. But between Reshiram, who's the next Pokemon we're going to get to, and Double Dragon Energy, and having 3 good attacks of varying power, he could really, really be good. I would like to see him played with Seismitoad so you can spend some time building him up on the bench. Regardless, I think he's cool. And the last non-ancient trait, EX Pokemon I want to mention today is Reshiram. I think I've mentioned him before. He has an ability called Turbo Blaze. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is active, you may choose a Fire Energy and attach it to one of your Dragon Pokemon in play. Don't worry about the attack is garbage. It's like the old Celebi Prime that people used to use with Celebi Mewtwo Tornadus. You put him up at the start of the turn, attach an energy, and then you switch back out again. This could get you, this could mean if you've got 1 energy on the Salamence, then turn 2, you turn around and put a Reshiram active, attach another energy, then you put a Double Dragon Energy, and then all of a sudden, we've now got a 4 energy Salamence in the active. Now there's a bunch of setup and you'll need float stones and switches and all of that to make it work. But my point remains valid. It's an incredibly interesting card. It gives universal energy acceleration to Dragon Pokemon, which have long been basically rubbish. Now, I've not got time in today's podcast, but between Reshiram and Double Dragon Energy, we are now in a situation where Dragon Pokemon that used to be too expensive are now actually potentially useful again. So what I'm going to do in next week's podcast or the week after, certainly in the near future, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to look through all the interesting Dragon Pokemon we've had, and I'm going to examine which of the Dragon Pokemon, now that we've got Reshiram and Double Dragon Energy, are going to be potentially useful. Now, going into the ancient traits for this particular set, something interesting has come up, and that is the fact that we seem to have ancient traits changing. Last time we had the Omega Double Strike and Alpha Growth, and now we've got different ones. And there are only 2. There's Delta Plus and Delta Revolution. So we're going to start off with Delta Plus. And this ancient trait allows you to take 1 more prize card if your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by damage from this Pokemon's attack, i.e., it's like a Lugia. And there are 5 of these, and I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to tell you which ones might be useful. Essentially, these Pokemon are going to be good in 2 situations. Number 1, if you can one-hit KO. Number 2, if you can just finish your opponent off. If you can be attacking with your main attacker, leave them just shy of a KO, and then take the KO with something like a Dustox or an Articuno, you're getting an extra prize, although you're also giving them a turn to heal. But hey-ho. Dustox does for a grass energy, it's a stage 2, remember. Dustox does pound 20 damage for a grass energy, or for a grass double colours it does 50 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. I like the bench damage, but it's overpriced, and I like that pound can be done for 1 energy, but it's a grass energy, it's on a stage 2, and honestly, although it's got the same, it's as interesting as all the other Delta Plus Pokemon, it's just not something which I see seeing a lot of play. Same with Articuno. It's again got Delta Plus, has all of these Pokemon I'm currently talking about do. It's got 1 attack for a water energy, which puts them asleep, well, you ain't taking any prizes from that, and they can just wake up again. They've got a 50% chance of being active for their turn, awake. Or for a water colourless, it does 20 damage, and as many heads as you can hit 40 times as many heads you can hit from free coins. Now that does potentially max out at 140, and you can then be putting a silver bangle on there to put it up to 170. Verbank laser will not do any good here because they'll die from poison, not from the attack, and Delta Plus won't kick in. So you can be one hit KOing EXs with this. The problem is you've got to hit 3 heads out of 3, and that gives you a 1 in 8 chance. Even if you put in Victory Flip Victini, it's still unlikely to happen. So Articuno, again, although I love this ancient trait of Delta Plus, I just don't really like the fact that you're not going to want to attack with him. And the whole point of these Delta Plus Pokemon, as far as I'm concerned, is they become really, really interesting and useful if you want to attack with them. If you don't want to attack with them, it doesn't matter how many extra prize cards you're taking. Now, the interesting one for me is Dragonite. Because, and the first 2, I don't think anyone's going to play. The next 3 people could. Dragonite does 150 damage. There's that 150 again. And, of course, Muscle Band, Silver Bangle, 170 or 180. So he can one-hit EXs. The problem is the attack costs grass, lightning, colourless. And yes, we've got double dragon energy, and yes, we've got Reshiram, but it's 5 energy on a stage 2, which is absolutely huge. One question I'm going to answer very quickly before it's not really the right time, but I'm going to forget otherwise. People have been asking about double dragon energy. Can it be moved with Aromatisse? And the answer is yes, as long as it's only ever attached to a dragon Pokemon. While it's attached to a dragon Pokemon, it counts as every type of energy, including fairy. So it can be moved with Aromatisse. But if you were to move it onto a Mewtwo, just like all the other special energy, now it gets discarded because it's attached to the wrong Pokemon. Like strong energy can only be attached to a fighting. So something to bear in mind. So that's the Dragonite. The most techable person, or Pokemon with Delta Plus, is a Swellow. 90 HP, stage 1, so it's not going to hang around for very long, and because it's a stage 1, your opponent is going to be able to see it coming. Your opponent sees a Tailo go down, which has only got 50 HP, and your opponent can take it out before Swellow gets going. But he does Peck, 30 damage for a double colourless, and he does Wing Attack, 50 damage for 3 colourless. It can be put into any deck as a 1-1 tech to get extra prizes. You leave any Pokemon 30 damage away from being killed, or less, bring Swellow up with a DCE, and get the KO. I could see people putting in a 1-1 Swellow deck, as a Swellow tech, I should say, as just a quick, hey, he's going to take me an extra prize. At one, in a big tournament, maybe in 2 or 3 games, I'm going to get an extra prize with this, and this is worth the extra 2 cards. Now, the last one is very interesting for me, and this is Natu, a Psychic Pokemon. 40 HP is garbage. But he attacks for a Psychic and a Colourless, and nowadays, every time you see Psychic and Colourless, you think single Psychic plus Dimension Valley, like we talked about with Deoxys. 10 times the number of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon, and that could add up quite nicely for some Pokemon. But it's a basic. You can put Natu down, attach a Psychic, and go. And that's what I think makes him better than the others. Dustox is a stage 2 with an expensive attack. It's just a stage 2. Articuno needs free energy. Dragonite's a stage 2. Swellow's a stage 1 that needs at least a DCE. Natu goes down, basic Pokemon, 1 energy, assuming you've got a Dimension Valley, and go. It's not good for non-psychic decks. It's never going to work for non-psychic decks. But for any other kind of decks, pretty gosh darn interesting. The other ancient trait we see is Delta Evolution. And this essentially allows you to just evolve. Even if it's your first turn of the game, even if the Pokemon was put in play that turn. And the first one of these is Banette. And he's got 1 interesting attack. Well, he's got Deep Curse, which again, Psychic Colourless, so just 1 Psychic with a Dimension Valley out. Put 5 damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon. It's not great. Having said that, the fact you can get him up in 1 turn with 1 energy doing that makes him better. But the one that interests me is Evolution Jammer. Psychic Energy, 20 damage. Your opponent cannot play any Pokemon to evolve the defending Pokemon during his or her next turn. Now, this seems to mean that Evo Soda and I think it's Wally, I think he's called, we'll get there later, can still be used potentially. But again, we'd have to wait for an English translation to have this really confirmed. But essentially, you get Burnett out on the first turn of the game and just stop your opponent evolving forever. Something like a Donphan deck, this could really, really hurt them, because a lot of Donphan decks have the only attackers as Horloger, who cannot attack a non-EX, and Donphan, who would never be able to evolve. So, Burnett could be interesting. I don't think he's going to be amazing, but I think Burnett could potentially be interesting. Now, probably the worst one of all of these, there is an Unpheasant. And there's two reasons I really don't like this Unpheasant. First of all, it evolves from a Tranquil, and Tranquil doesn't have this ability. So although the Unpheasant can Delta Revolution straight from a Tranquil, Tranquil doesn't have Delta Revolution. So you can't evolve from a Pidove to a Tranquil on turn 1. So it's kind of a little bit irrelevant. It's a huge weakness here. You really need both of them having Delta Revolution, otherwise you're only saving one turn and you might as well just use Rare Candy. But I suppose it's kind of interesting. And the Unpheasant's got two, it's got Feather Dance for a double colourless, which means you do 80 more damage next turn, and 120 damage for free colourless energy, which fails on a coin flip. So you could end up spending 2 turns doing this, going to do 200 damage, and then flipping tails and doing nothing. I don't like Unpheasant, but I'm mentioning all the ancient trait Pokemon so he gets some mention. There are, however, 2 Delta Revolution Pokemon that I very much do like. There is a colourless Altaria. Don't worry about the attack's rubbish. But it's got an ability, Clear Humming. As long as this Pokemon is in play, each of your colourless Pokemon has no weakness. Now, I'm not going to spend much time talking about Rayquaza. I mentioned him a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, and we talked about him at great length. Go and look up that podcast for a full discussion about him. But essentially, the colourless Mega Rayquaza is borderline broken. It's amazing. One of the things which evens him out is the fact that he's weak to Manectric, who can kill him very, very easily. Altaria takes away the weakness. That's amazing. Now, you do have to play a 40 HP Swablu, but you can evolve that Swablu the second you bench him using Altaria's Delta Revolution. Altaria is amazing, and it's just Rayquaza doesn't need all of this. It doesn't need the Delta Revolution so it can evolve on turn 1 of the game. You know, you can evolve from Rayquaza to Mega Rayquaza on the first turn of the game, and you can evolve Altaria to get around the weakness on the first turn of the game. I'm going to be mentioning Rayquaza. Maybe next week I'll sit down and do a proper discussion on Rayquaza as a whole, but we've done that, already before. We don't need to dwell on it. Altaria, it's just good. It's just really, really annoyingly good. Another Pokemon which is exceedingly interesting is Togekiss, but it's got the same problem as Unpheasant in that Togetic doesn't have Delta Revolution, so you can't just evolve straight up. And this is a huge weakness, because if you could evolve straight up, Togekiss would be amazing. The attack's garbage, don't worry about it. But it's got an ability, Serene Grace. Once during your turn, when you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may use this ability. Look at the top 8 cards of your deck, then choose as many basic energies you find there, and attach them as you like. Now, I don't need to spend a huge amount of time talking about this. Think about, and I did this a lot in last week's podcast, when we talked about the Primal Clash EXs, or was it 2 weeks ago? And I did it when I talked about my top 10 cards of Primal Clash. Speaking of which, it's on YouTube. Go check it out. If I do say so myself, it's brilliant. Just search PTCG Radio on YouTube, or Google PTCG Radio YouTube. You'll find it nice and quickly. Any deck which has trouble getting energy out, this helps. Virizion Genesect, you can Emerald Slash on turn 1, or even not bother, turn 2, easily. You never have to bother Emerald Slashing. Groudon decks can use this to accelerate energy. Now, it's a bit of a crapshoot in terms of actually getting the Pokemon there and getting the energy in the right place in the deck. We don't have the cards that we've had in the past to help us with that, but it's still interesting. When I thought this was going to be paired with a Togetic, I was so high on this card. Because if you could just go Togepi, Togetic, Togekiss, attach the energy, you could then go Scoop Up Cyclone, Super Scoop Up Oraz, and do the whole thing again, and you could with a 1-1-1 line, you could do this 3 or 4 times in a couple of turns, in one turn even, and just get all of your energy out, or enough energy out. If you can get 8 energy on 2 Groudons in the first 2 turns of the game, well, Primal Groudons, you are going to win basically every single game you play. And a lot of people looked at Togekiss and went, we've got other options for accelerating energy. And I think a lot of people were missing stuff. I think people underestimated quite how good this could be. The fact that you can just get 4 energy on a Primal Groudon on turn 2 from nothing. The fact that you can just get 3 energy onto a Genesect when you've got no energy on the board as a Virgin player, etc, etc. I think people were really underestimating this card. And then we don't get a Togetic with Delta Evolution is such a problem. As it stands, this card is good and it's interesting and it will see play. But it's constantly going to be hampered by the fact that I've got to leave a 40 HP Togepi on my bench for at least a turn before I can do anything. And then I can go Togetic Togekiss. But it gives my opponent a turn to kill it. If I could go through all 3 in one, it would be amazing. And this leads me to my only real moan about the set today, and that is, what is the point of putting Stage 2 Pokemon that have Delta Evolution if they don't have a corresponding Stage 1 Pokemon with Delta Evolution? It even mocks you in the wording where it says, even if that Pokemon was put into play this turn, or it's your first turn, you're not going to have a Togetic out on the first turn or your first turn of the game. It's not possible. It's ridiculous. So they're even mocking you in the wording of Delta Evolution. I don't like Delta Evolution. It's annoying. No, sorry, I do like it. I don't like it when we have Delta Evolution on Stage 2 with no corresponding Stage 1. This is annoying to me. Hey-ho. So those are the non-EX Pokemon. Now, in terms of the EXs, I'm going to be honest here, it's a little bit barren. There are 2 insanely good ones which we've talked about at length, so I'm just going to quickly run through the others, but I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on any of them because I don't think any of them are particularly good. So there is a Thundurus EX. Now this annoys me. Where's my Mamoswine EX? Where's my Donphan EX? Where's my Emboar EX? Where's my Porygon EX? Or Porygon Z I suppose would have to be. Where's my Snorlax EX? We've already got a Thundurus EX. It's a hell of a lot better than this one. A Lightning and a Colourless for 30 damage or 60 on a Heads, 30 and Paralysis on a Tails is kind of cool. I'm not going to lie to you. Especially when you put Fliptini out. So I suppose there is some value in this. You can put Fliptini out, and for 2 energy you've got a 75% chance of Paralysis with doing, 50 damage with a Muscle Band. So I kind of like Thundurus EX is first attack. But honestly, I don't really want to be putting 2 energy on it before I can do anything. That annoys me. The second attack does, shockingly, 150 damage. Oh, that pun was not intended, but it totally worked. Because he's a lightning Pokemon. 150 damage for 3 lightning energy and 50 to itself. I mean, the only time I could see that being really useful is in Expanded with something like Eels, but then I'd rather play Zekrom EX rather than Thundurus EX, so... or even Rayquaza EX. Essentially, you have to go into Expanded to find support for it, and at that stage, there's just better EXs to be playing anyway. Sorry, Thundurus EX. The first attack does have some use as a kind of, I'm going to paralyze you 3 out of 4 turns while doing about 50 damage a turn. There is a Gallade EX. It's Psychic, so Dimension Valley's in play. The first attack for a Psychic Colourless or Psychic with a... Dimension Valley out, does 30 damage, and you can make your opponent switch their active. They choose, according to the current translation, which of their bench comes up. Kind of interesting, I suppose. The second attack really isn't very good. 3 Psychic, so you cannot cut the cost down with Dimension Valley. 50 damage, with 20 more damage for each prize card you have. So before you've taken any prize cards, it does a whopping 170. And then it only gets worse from there. So 3 energy attachments, and it's only good before you've taken any prizes. Don't like it. Mega Gallade, slightly more interesting. Psychic, Colourless, which comes down to Psychic if you've got a Dimension Valley out. 110 damage, 30 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that already has any damage on it. So if you were to play this with bats, you could put a Golbat out and do 10 damage to all of your opponent's bench. and then start doing 30 to everything with Gallade. Spread decks haven't been good for a while. There's too much healing, and we've got Mr. Mime and all of that to block attacks to the bench. So it's not terribly good. I don't really like it very much, but it's, I suppose, moderately interesting. Latios EX is the other Pokemon that can attack on the first turn of the game. Could donk something like a Togepi, for instance. Fast raid, 1 Psychic Energy, 40 damage, meh. The second attack for a Water Psychic Colourless does 110 and prevents all effects of your opponent's attacks except damage done to this Pokemon during your opponent's next turn. So you can't be poisoned, etc., but you can still be damaged, and it takes 4 energy. Even with Double Dragon, that's overpriced. Mega Latios EX, however, is slightly more interesting. It's got an attack called Sonic Ace. Water Psychic Colourless, discard 2 energy and do 120 damage to to any of your opponent's Pokemon. Could work to the bench as well. Now this I like. You have 1 energy on Mega Latios, and it could be a colourless energy, and then you can go put Double Dragon energy on, do Sonic Ace, discard Double Dragon energy, because you discard 2 energy and Double Dragon counts as 2 energy, and then your opponent cannot enhance time on the Double Dragon energy off. So I think Mega Latios is kind of interesting as a bit of a sniper, but again, we've got Mr. Mime, and 120 damage, it's not going to kill a bench Donphan, because their bench Donphan's got 130 damage, 130 HP, so again, interesting but slightly underpowered. And for the first time in a long time, it really looks like the EXs in this set, with the 2 exceptions we'll get to, are the kind of weak point of the set. What's really interesting me about this set are cards like maybe Deoxys, but especially things like Salamence and Absol and Ninjask and the Dragonite Blissey Prime and the Reshiram and all of that good stuff. That's what's interesting me. Moving on down, we've got Hydreigon EX, which has a decent ability, which means that if there's a stadium in play, each of your dragon Pokemon have a double colourless less in their retreat cost, giving all of your dragon free or close to free retreat. And that's pretty cool. The attack for a Psychic Dark Colourless does 80 damage and isn't affected by any effects on the opponent's active Pokemon. So it would go through things like Safeguard, and it would be able to hit Pyroar, but no one's playing that anymore. So it's, moderately interesting. And now we get to the 2 EXs that we don't need to spend much time on. These are amazing, they are basically broken, and we've talked about them before. Rayquaza EX is meh, but Mega Rayquaza EX, these are the colourless ones, it has Delta Evolution. You can evolve on the first turn of the game. It's got an attack for free energy that does 30 damage times the number of Pokemon on your bench. 6 bench Pokemon, 180 damage, 1 hit KO. And we've got the stadium that allows you to have 8 bench Pokemon. And we've got a supporter card which just breaks this. And we've got Altaria to get rid of the weakness. And we've got Mega Turbo to allow you to attach that third energy in 1 turn. On your first turn of the game, if you're going second, you could, theoretically, have a Mega Rayquaza EX hitting for 240 damage with no weakness. That is utterly ridiculous. The other amazing one, and the full art of this is just beautiful. Shaymin EX, this card is broken. It is the best card we've had in a while. When I did my top 10 cards of Phantom Forces, I underestimated VS Seeker. Looking back, that was the best card in Phantom Forces. And I may well do a rejigged, probably only a top 5, but an actual top 5 cards of Phantom Forces as they stand. Primal Clash, there was no, as far as we can see at the moment, no slam dunk best card in the format. It may well end up coming down to Teammates, Archies and Maxes, or Acrobike. Meh. But in this set, it's Shaymin. It's just brilliant. The attack isn't very good. No one cares about the attack. The ability allows you to draw until you've got 6 cards in your hand. This makes decks consistent again. I want Shaymin to be the card that puts us back into a format where it's not, oh, you drew your Junipers and I didn't, you win. But a format where, oh my god, you had a tech for my deck, and of course you got it out. All of our decks are consistent. The tech, you got the tech out. And, so that's why they win. I've been talking to my friends about this the last couple of weeks, and I played Donphan fairly soon after I started. I managed to make top cut at Nationals with it, the only time I've actually done so. And the thing I loved about my Donphan deck was, between Uxie and Pokédraw Plus and all of that, it ran. And I would lose to Gyarados because Gyarados beat me. And I would lose to Jumpluff because Jumpluff beat me. But I would beat SP unless my opponent really outplayed me. And that was what I loved. I loved those games. Whereas nowadays I'll go to entire tournaments like Cornwall Regionals and draw no supporters and end up rossing all evening. It's no fun. So, Shaymin, just amazing. Get them as fast as you can. The price is going to be insane. I would imagine Pokemon will end up doing a promo like they did with Mewtwo, like they did with Lugia, like they did with Darkrai and Yveltal. And Pokemon, give them their credit, have been very good at doing promotional versions of the awesome EXs in recent years. But even so, that ain't going to be out before Nationals. Get it while you can. So to finish off then, let's have a very quick look at the trainers. Revive has been reprinted. Put a basic Pokemon from the discard pile onto your bench. Meh, it's fine, not amazing, it's useful. But there are some new ones to talk about. And these are interesting. Firstly, Trainer's Post. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck. Choose one trainer card you find there, except Trainer's Post. Reveal it and put it into your hand. Now it says trainer, not trainer item, so this could be used for a supporter. So, and there is a supporter you may want this for. You can only run 4 of those supporters. You could also run something like Trainer's Post, which would just increase your odds of hitting that supporter turn 1. This isn't a great card. It's not going to see masses and masses of play, but it's just about interesting enough that people are going to look at it and go, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. I might have a go with this. It's really going to be used in speed decks where there's a particular trainer that you really need. Where, you really need to hit that Spirit Link early. And, you can't search with that something that, I suppose my supporter example might not have been great because we've got Jirachi and we've got Random Receiver. But let's say you really need your Spirit Link for Mega Rayquaza because, of course, if you don't have the Spirit Link, then you're not going to be able to evolve on turn 1 without ending your turn. You can evolve, but you can't attack. Trainer's Post... It will raise your odds of getting a turn 1 trainer. Having said that, I really cannot imagine many decks actually having the space to run this. Now, one card we've seen before is Mega Turbo, and this is an incredibly good trainer card, but we don't need to spend much time on it. We've talked about it before. Mega Turbo is a card that allows you to attach a basic energy from your discard to one of your Mega Evolved Pokemon in play. And this is crazy, crazy good. It's another part of the puzzle which makes Rayquaza so good. Because if you've got a Mega Rayquaza EX, the colourless one, in play, and you can do that with the help of a Spirit Link in its Delta Evolution, you can then attach a double colourless energy, play a Mega Turbo if you've got some energy in your discard, and then you've got free energy attached to it, and that's how you can get it going in one turn. This would also allow you to be attacking with a Mega Manectric in one turn, or to be honest, you could, in theory, play 5 of these in one turn. If you were playing Dowsing Machine. So you could, in theory, get up to 5 energy on a Mega EX in one turn. You can get anything going in a turn. But things like Mega Rayquaza and Mega Manectric are ones where you only need to use it once, and it seems a bit more sensible that you'll be using it for that. We also have a wide-angled lens. When this Pokemon the card is attached to does damage to your opponent's bench, it applies weakness and resistance. Now, we only really have one Pokemon that does that at the moment, and it's the Espeon. When I played my Evolutions deck for a little while, the one I stole off Tommy Roberts, this was exceptionally good against things like Trubbish. It could allow things like Crobat to do some good damage to Trubbish. So Trubbish wouldn't quite be KO'd from that. It allows things like Manectric to hit Yveltal for weakness while it's on the bench, doing 40 rather than the 20. Now, one of my Twitter followers tweeted at me today that this might see the fall of Yveltal, and I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but certainly it's going to be nice against Yveltal. We don't play that much bench damage at the moment, and honestly, we would usually rather play, a muscle band for the active. But certainly being able to hit something like let's say you're playing your Landorus, you can hit something like a Manectric on the bench for weakness. The thing to remember is, however, that if I'm using a Landorus in the active, Muscle Band does 50 to the active and then 30 to the bench, whereas Wide Angle Lens would do 30 to the active and 60 to the bench. There's only 10 HP in it. And, if you're talking like a Mega Manectric, well, you're swapping, if you put a Muscle Band on the Manectric, you're doing 40 to the active, 20 to the bench. If you put a wide-angled lens on Manectric, you're doing 20 to the active, 40 to the bench if it's lightning weak. So a lot of the time, if you do the maths, you're actually better off overall with a muscle band on the active, not a wide-angled lens. But having said that, maybe you need that extra 20 damage to KO the bench Pokemon. So I ain't judging here. But it's not quite as good as we might think. The only stadium in the set is Skyfield. You can have up to 8 bench Pokemon. And this is good for many, many things. Things like Florges, which does more damage for the amount of bench Pokemon. Things like the Plasma Absol could be good for here. But really, it's Mega Rayquaza EX, up to 240 damage. And like I've said, with the Spirit Link and the Mega Revolution and the Double Colorless Energy and the Mega Turbo, this could be a real thing. And then there's the only energy in the set is Double Dragon Energy, which we've talked about a lot. 2 energy of any type to a Dragon Pokemon, and it really makes Dragon Pokemon relevant again. Now, moving into, and there's 2 supporters I've deliberately left till the end, best till last and all of that. Oh, by the way, Secret Rare, Energy Switch and VS Seeker, so if you like blinging your deck, get ready to spend some money. There is a Battle Mega Rayquaza EX deck, and there's nothing really in here. There is a Rayquaza Spirit Link, which works for... Oh, by the way, we also have Spirit Links for Gallade and Latios. Like I've said, if it comes out in a set, it's going to have a Spirit Link. And there's Steven, the supporter we've already seen before, which allows you to search for a supporter and a basic energy. It's not really good enough. It's not going to see a huge amount of play. The Rayquaza Spirit Link works for both the Colourless and the Dragon Rayquaza, and actually gives you an option as to which one you can evolve into. There's a Zekrom that's terrible. There's a Rayquaza EX, which I'm not a huge fan of. Yeah. And it's not colourless, which will be coming to play, for things like Altaria. I don't think anyone's ever going to play this. But there's a Mega Rayquaza EX that does 300 damage for 5 energy. And as I've said, with Double Dragon Energy and Rayquaza and Mega Turbo, this is easier to do than you might think. So, although I keep going on about the colourless Mega Rayquaza as being good, and again, there's more reasons for that in a moment, it's, the Dragon one's no slouch. It's weak to Fairy, which is bad, because there will be some Fairy decks running around now. They've got enough support to be relevant. But Mega Rayquaza EX, like I say, 300 damage, discard 2 energy, but that's just 1 Double Dragon Energy. The combination of Reshiram, Double Dragon Energy, and Mega Turbo will make Mega Rayquaza EX relevant. The Dragon one, but it's all about the colourless one. Now, there are 2 supporters in the set, and they are both doozies. There's Wally. Search your deck for a card that evolves from one of your Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX, so no Mega Evolving here, and put it onto that Pokemon. This counts as evolving that Pokemon. You can use this card during your first turn or on a Pokemon that was put into play this turn. So you could get Togekiss going in one turn by using Wily on the Togepi and then Delta Evolution on the Togekiss. But really, I mean, the good stuff here, I mean, the 2 that immediately sprung to mind were Donphan and Excadrill. You've got a Drillbur out. You use Wally. I'm going to stop doing that because it's probably really annoying. You use Wally, and then you've got your Excadrill turn 1. You attach 1 energy, use Dredge. Now you've got, on turn 1, everything you need to use Matclaw for 50, 70, or 80 damage. That's pretty cool. And all you need is a Drillbur and a single energy to get that going with Wally. That's pretty darn cool. By the way, if I use this in tournaments, when in actual decks I'm playing at tournaments, I will do the proper Wally voice. And that's pretty cool. And then, there are other options for that. I'm just scratching the surface. But the 2 that came to mind, and like I say, this is my first impression of the set I'm giving you today. The 2 that came to mind were your Excadrill and your Donphan. The other one, and this is crazy good, search Winona. And the full art is beautiful. Search your deck for up to 3 colourless Pokemon and put them into your hand. And at first, that seems... It's Pokemon Collector, but only for colourless Pokemon. And that seems good, until you realise that Shaymin is a colourless Pokemon. And then Winona becomes borderline broken. You can search for 2 or 3 Shaymin. Now, in a speed deck, your aim is to play your cards. So there'll be tools that you can put down. There will be... trainer draw, Pokemon to be benched, etc. If you're playing Mega EXs, then you'll be wanting to play a bunch of energy to be discarded and Mega Turbo. So you can be playing, and those of you that played when Uxie was out will back me up here. You played Pokemon Collector and you always got an Uxie, and you would play down everything you could and play an Uxie. And there'd be turns you play down 2 or 3 Uxies in a row. You can do that here. Now, there aren't that many good colourless attackers at the moment other than Rayquaza. If you had a Spirit Link in your hand, you would be able to use Winona to go and get Rayquaza, colourless, attach the Spirit Link. You'd get Mega Rayquaza as your second and evolve him up, and your turn wouldn't end because, Spirit Link. And then your third colourless Pokemon could be a Shaymin to draw your hand up to 6. And this is why Rayquaza decks, and it's not going to take... I've put all this together. I would be amazed if I was the only one. People will be playing this deck. This will be the in-deck at Nationals. Think about it this way. I'm going to sum it up for you. You've got Rayquaza and Mega Rayquaza. And between Spirit Link and Delta Revolution, you can get that going on your first turn without ending your turn. It attacks for free energy, which can be provided with 1 double colourless and 1 Mega Turbo. And you've got the Stadium, which allows you to have up to 8 bench Pokemon. And you've got Altaria, which takes away your weakness and has Delta Evolution. And you've got Winona, which allows you to search for your Rayquaza and your Mega Rayquaza and your Shaymin. That's crazy. Winona and Shaymin as a combination is one you'd better get used to seeing. It's going to be absolutely everywhere. Now, there aren't that many colourless Pokemon that we all play. I've been trying to think about this over the last, few hours since I've been reading the set. And there really aren't that many colourless Pokemon we all see. But that's not the point. Shaymin is a colourless Pokemon. So even if you're just using this to search for a couple of Shaymin, that's still pretty useful. Maybe you don't play this in a non-colourless deck, because it's not worth it just for the Shaymin, but certainly in a Rayquaza EX deck. And I'm almost in two minds about whether they've given Rayquaza EX too much. I mean, you've got the Dragon one as well, and I've talked about that. But, the fact that you've got the Stadium to increase your bench, and that it's got Delta Evolution, and it's got a Spirit Link, and it's got Mega Turbo, and it works off double colourless, and it's got Winona, and Shaymin is also a colourless Pokemon, which works with Winona, and it's got Altaria to take away weakness. It's just an awful lot for one Pokemon. Get used to seeing this deck at Nationals. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Emerald Break. All of the trainers you need to know about, and all of the Pokemon you need to know about. Now, I'm not saying I've not missed something. If I have, tweet me at the Wussy. Email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. I'm not going to go into any other news. That can all wait till next week. I will be at Nottingham Regionals this Saturday if anyone's around and wants to come and say hello. And there is a decent but not yet 100% chance I will also be at Nottingham League Challenge on Sunday, just because I love playing in Nottingham and I haven't played enough Pokemon lately. And I've got a weekend that I want to get to it. I am really trying to decide on a super fast trainer-led Donphan deck, which loses fairly hard to Seismitoad, but is consistent and has got Donphan in, or Mewtwo Bats, which is a deck similar to the one I crashed out with at Nottingham Cornwall Regionals. I want a bit of revenge, and I really like the matchups. I think it's going to beat Landorus Bats. I think it's going to beat Seismitoad. And it can go toe-to-toe with Yveltal. So, feel free to tweet me or email me your opinion of which I should play this weekend. Mewtwo Bats or Speed Donphan. And I think that will about do it for this week. Make sure you let me know about the sets, either in the comments down below, or if you're just listening to this any other way, other than YouTube or SoundCloud, just make sure you go on Twitter at the Wussy, or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, and I might even get back to you if you're very lucky people. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you will agree that waiting a day so I could get all of Emerald Break into the podcast the day it spoiled was worth it. Have a lovely week. Look after yourselves. I'll see you all next week. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.